The Foreign Affairs Department budget in 2008-2009, $6 billion. 2009-2010, $14 billion. What's the explanation?
I'm not sure what figures you're quoting, Mr. Duceppe. I can tell you this, that Canada was the first country to fulfill its commitment to double its aid to Africa, to double its foreign aid, and we have made sure during this recession that we have not reduced foreign aid, but we are making the decisions.
But you're wrong with that explanation.
To make that foreign aid more effective.
The explanation is a $6.6 billion check to GM in Detroit.
Okay, gentlemen, that brings to a conclusion this segment. We now go on to question 3, the broad theme of which is governance. And this is the segment where the one-on-one will feature Stephen Harper against Michael Ignatieff. Let's go to our question from Newfoundland and Labrador.
I'm Sam Diamond from Mount Pearl, Newfoundland and Labrador. It's very likely that whoever wins the next election will have another minority government. How do you plan on working with the other parties to turn a minority parliament into a functioning, trustworthy institution that Canadians can be proud of?
Okay, Mr. Harper, you have added first.
Really clear in saying I hope that Canadians do elect a majority government. I think this cycle of election after election, minority after minority, is beginning to put some of the country's interests in serious jeopardy. But we will of course continue to do what we've done. We've been elected twice as a minority government. We've tried to work with the other parties. I think if you look at our platform and our programs, they reflect ideas that have come from well outside our party. But obviously, in the end, the government must take responsibility for its decisions and must be accountable to Canadians, and that's what we will continue to do.
Mr. Ignatieff.
Sam, we're having an election this time because Mr. Harper didn't tell Parliament the truth about any of his economic promises. $30 billion on jets, $13 billion on prisons, $6 billion on unaffordable tax cuts. Parliament, the Speaker of the House of Commons held the government in contempt. This is a Prime Minister who shut down Parliament twice. We need to rebuild our democracy after Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper cannot be trusted with the institutions of our country. It's as simple as that. This is he can't control. He shut down Parliament twice. If you're asking me how we rebuild democracy, it means working with other parties, listening to other people's ideas, letting democracy flourish, making sure we listen to Canadians and treat them with respect, instead of replacing this system of continuous, constant control.
You two are allowed to have at it now.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity. First of all, everybody should realize the so-called contempt motion Mr. Ignatieff speak of is not a ruling of a court or a ruling of the Speaker. It was simply a case of the other three parties outvoting us. We don't agree with that. We don't agree with that is what Parliament should be focused on. Parliament had before it a budget that contained the next phase of Canada's economic action plan that outlined important benefits for Canadian seniors, for workers, for entrepreneurs, for industry. That budget was well received across the political spectrum, not just by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, even the Canadian Labour Congress. That's what Parliament should be working on. It is unfortunate we're at that stage, but that's where we're at today. And if we have a minority government, my fear is we will go where we're at today. And if we have a minority government, my fear is we will go through a 5th election and a 6th election. I think at some point Canadians have to make a decision. We believe we're on the right track. We're asking Canadians for a clear majority so we can get on with the nation's business and focus on the economy.
But Mr. Harper, you haven't earned a majority. Majorities are things you earn when you earn the trust of the Canadian people. And you haven't earned the trust of the Canadian people because you don't trust the Canadian people. Why, just 2 weeks ago at a meeting in London, you threw somebody out of your meetings because you didn't like what was on their Facebook page. There was a veteran who wanted to get into one of your meetings and you tossed them out because you thought, oh my God, he might ask me a difficult question. I mean, this isn't strong leadership, Mr. Harper. This is weak leadership. What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of the Canadian people? We need a leader here who respects Canadian people, renews Canadian democracy, answers tough questions when he's put to it by the Canadian people. What are you afraid of? Why are you displaying this kind of persistent process of controlling what you can't shut down?
That I've gone across this country, not just during campaigns, to meet regularly with Canadians from all walks of life. That's one of the reasons, as a minority government, we've been able to stay in office, because we stayed connected with Canadians, with their real challenges and their real needs. And, you know, I don't think this kind of political bickering, personal attacks back and forth is frankly going to do anything for Canadians. What we need to do is lay out where we're going to take the economy. That's what this government's done. We're on the right track. Let's move forward. And in terms of trust, I trust the Canadian people. They've elected us twice. If they don't elect us, I will accept that judgment. But we trust the Canadians' people's judgment. We ask them to take a look at all the platforms of the party and ask themselves, are these things really affordable? And do we want to stay on a low-tax economic track or go on to a high-tax one?
Mr. Ignatieff.
You trust the Canadian people so little that when you didn't like something on young person's Facebook, you toss them out of their meeting. When a veteran wants to ask you a tough question, you make sure he doesn't get into the hole. What kind of respect is that? You got to walk the walk here, Mr. Harper, and you haven't. You've shut down talking about Parliament as if it's this little debating society that's a pesky interference in your rule of the country. It's not. It's the Parliament of the people of Canada, and they found you in contempt. And you're the first Prime Minister in the history of Canada for that to happen to. So you explain that to the Canadian people, will you?
That's why we're having elections. And Canadians will make a judgment as to whether that action by your three parties was valid or whether what we should have been doing was focusing on the economy. Fact of the matter is this, as I say, this government has held more consultations with Canadians all across the country than any other government in history. That's how we stay connected to Canadians. We listen to Canadians. We also listen to Parliament. Parliament is where we got our mandate because we won the most seats in a national election, and obviously it's up to Canadians to decide whether to renew that mandate.
Last word in the one-on-one to Mr. Ignatieff.
You don't listen to Parliament. You didn't tell Parliament the truth. For 6 months, we asked, where are the numbers to justify your budget choices? It doesn't get more basic than that. That's what they put us in Parliament to do, to hold you to account. You stiffed Parliament, Mr. Harper, and that's why your government lost confidence. That's why your government lost confidence. That's why we're having an election. And it's time you showed some respect for the basic institutions of the country.
Well, Mr. Ignatieff, the contrary is the fact. We gave all that information to Parliament.
Nonsense.
We gave it all. And then what Parliament demanded was more documents because they said the information wasn't correct. So then we gave more documents which verified the information we have. I understand Parliament's at a stage where the opposition's not willing to take yes for an answer. That's why we're in an election campaign. What matters to people now is not the bickering that goes on in Parliament. It's our ability to focus on what matters to them. And what matters to them is the economy. We've got important, affordable measures.
I've got to jump in here, make sure we stay on time. I gave you first word in the one-on-one. You've got to get the last word in the one-on-one, then Mr. Layton.
You keep using this word bickering. This isn't bickering, Mr. Harper. This is democracy. This is a debate. It's not some pesky little irrelevance that gets in the way of your power. This is how democracy works. I ask questions. I hold you accountable. It isn't bickering. This is what democracy is about. It's about time you respected it.
Jack Layton.
Well, I think people are seeing an example of what's broken in Ottawa here. Pretty plain for all to see. But the question from Sam, I think, was a very valid question. He said, can parties work together on our behalf? I'll bet every Canadian thinks that we ought to be working together on their behalf. And I believe that's exactly what we should be doing. Mr. Harper thinks that working together is somehow a bad thing. He tries to vilify it and call us names for even suggesting the idea. And I just think that's completely unacceptable.
That's obviously not correct. One of the reasons the government has stayed in office for 5 years as a minority is we have found partners on various measures, all the various measures we brought forward. For the first time, this time, all three parties have decided they want to defeat the government. That's their prerogative. That's why we're before the Canadian people. But I think the government's record of running a stable minority in this country is pretty clear, and also leading the country through a very difficult economic time in a way that's creating jobs for Canadians. And what we're asking for Canadians is to give us a mandate to keep doing that.
Well, actually,
if you stay there 5 years, the